In the blazing heat of the USS Truman's flight deck, a quiet maintenance tech was about to face a routine inspection. What started as ordinary aircraft maintenance took a shocking turn when they came face to face with a captain's piercing gaze and a tattoo that would change everything. Eliza Hart wasn't your typical third-class technician. For years, she had spent her life operating in the Navy's deepest shadows, known for solving impossible problems when failure meant death. When she encountered Captain Trenton's sharp eyes during what should have been a standard inspection, she had no idea she was walking into a moment that would shatter her carefully constructed anonymity. Hart's instinctive push of her sleeve that would lead to the exposure of classified military symbology, waves and Latin words marking her as part of operations that officially never existed. What began as another day of invisible service would become a reckoning with a past she'd tried to bury. The USS Truman would never be the same after the crew discovered that their quiet ghost in the engine bay was actually one of the Navy's most classified assets, a member of Operation Blackwake who had saved more lives than most officers could imagine, now serving in shadows by choice rather than circumstance. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Pacific sun beat down mercilessly on the flight deck of the USS Truman, turning the steel into a griddle that could fry an egg in 30 seconds flat. Below the roar of idling F/A-18 Super Hornets and the constant percussion of pneumatic tools, maintenance tech third-class Eliza Hart worked with the kind of focused precision that made her nearly invisible to everyone around her. At 31, Eliza had perfected the art of being overlooked. Average height, dark hair pulled back in regulation ponytail, sleeves rolled up just enough to access the engine components but never enough to reveal more than necessary. She moved through the maze of aircraft with an economy of motion that suggested deep familiarity with her environment, every step calculated, every tool placement deliberate. "Hey, Hart!" Petty Officer Shea Marshall's voice cut through the mechanical symphony like a rusty blade. "You gonna spend all day making love to that engine, or are you actually gonna fix the damn thing?" Quote. Eliza didn't look up from the Super Hornet's port engine intake. Her hands continued their methodical work, checking connections, testing resistance, her digital multimeter reading steady. "Engine's fine," she said quietly, her voice barely carrying over the ambient noise. "Just making sure it stays that way." Marshall laughed, the sound harsh and grating. He was the kind of petty officer who thrived on finding fault, especially with techs who didn't kiss up to his authority. "Acting like you own the deck, Hart. This ain't your personal workshop." "Never said it was." Eliza's response was neutral, professional. She'd learned long ago that engaging with Marshall's provocations only escalated them. Better to let him burn himself out on his own hot air. Near the starboard rail, Specialist June Ramirez glanced up from her own maintenance checklist. She'd been watching Eliza work for the past hour, noting the older woman's systematic approach, the way she seemed to anticipate mechanical problems before they manifested. There was something different about Hart, something that went beyond standard Navy technical training. Ramirez had seen plenty of mechanics in her 3 years aboard the Truman, but none who moved with such quiet confidence. "You know what your problem is, Hart?" Marshall continued, apparently not ready to let the conversation die. "You think you're better than the rest of us, walking around here like some kind of ghost, never talking to nobody, never joining the crew for anything. What's your deal?" This time Eliza did pause, her wrench hovering over a particularly stubborn bolt. For just a moment, something flickered across her features. Not anger, but something deeper, more complex. "I'm here to do my job, Marshall, same as everyone else." "Yeah, well, your job is about to get a lot more complicated," Chief Petty Officer David Ketterman announced as he approached their section, clipboard in hand and expression stern. "Got word from the bridge. Captain's doing a surprise inspection this afternoon, and I mean a real inspection, not the usual dog and pony show. Department heads, brass from the air wing, the whole 9 yards." The maintenance crew around them began exchanging glances. Surprise inspections were never good news, especially when they involved multiple levels of command. It usually meant someone higher up the food chain was looking for problems, and problems had a way of rolling downhill onto the people who actually did the work. "What's that got to do with us?" Marshall asked, though his earlier bravado had noticeably diminished. "What it's got to do with you," Ketterman said, pointing directly at Marshall, "is that you're gonna make sure every tool is secured, every work area is spotless, and every tech is ready to answer questions about their assigned aircraft. His gaze shifted to Eliza. "Hart, I need you to finish up whatever you're doing there and move to the back section. We don't need any complications during the inspection." Eliza's hands stilled on her tools. "Complications?" "You know what I mean. Keep your head down. Stay out of the way. Let the louder personalities handle any questions. Some of these officers don't appreciate the quiet types. They want to see energy, enthusiasm, military bearing. You just—" He gestured vaguely at her. "You do your thing, but do it somewhere the brass won't notice." Ramirez felt a flare of irritation on Eliza's behalf. The woman was the best tech on the deck. Everyone knew it, even if they didn't want to admit it. She'd seen Hart troubleshoot problems that had stumped mechanics with twice her rank, fix issues that others would have escalated to civilian contractors. The idea that she should hide during an inspection because she wasn't flashy enough struck Ramirez as fundamentally wrong. But Eliza simply nodded. "Understood, Chief." As Ketterman moved on to harass other sections, Marshall shook his head. "See what I mean? No backbone, no pride, just takes whatever they dish out." "Maybe she's just smart enough to pick her battles," Ramirez said quietly, earning a sharp look from Marshall. "Nobody asked you, Boot." Eliza resumed her work, but something in her posture had shifted. The casual confidence was still there, but now it was overlaid with a kind of careful control, as if she was consciously monitoring every movement, every expression. She reached for a torque wrench, and as she did, her sleeve rode up slightly, revealing just a glimpse of what looked like an intricate tattoo on her left wrist. The marking was unusual, not the typical anchor or eagle that most Navy personnel favored, but something more elaborate. From Ramirez's angle, it looked like stylized waves rendered in deep blue ink, with text underneath in what might have been Latin. The design was partially hidden by Eliza's watchband, but even the visible portion suggested careful artistry and significant meaning. Eliza noticed Ramirez looking and smoothly adjusted her sleeve, covering the tattoo completely. Their eyes met for just a moment, brown to brown, and Ramirez saw something there that made her stomach flutter with curiosity. There was depth in that gaze, a weight of experience that seemed inconsistent with a third-class maintenance tech. It was the look of someone who had seen things, done things, survived things that most people couldn't imagine. "Hart." Marshall's voice had taken on a different tone, suspicious now rather than merely antagonistic. "What's that on your wrist?" "What's what?" Eliza's response was perfectly neutral, but her hands moved automatically to check that her sleeves were properly positioned. "Looked like a tattoo." "You authorized to have ink in a visible area?" "It's not visible," Eliza said simply, which was technically true now that her sleeve covered it. Marshall stepped closer, clearly intending to press the issue, but the sound of approaching footsteps made him reconsider. A group of officers was making their way across the deck, led by someone in pristine dress blues whose bearing suggested significant rank. "Heads up," Ramirez whispered. "Here comes the inspection." The maintenance crew immediately shifted into inspection mode, backs straighter, tools organized, expressions alert and professional. Eliza quietly moved toward the back section, as Ketterman had ordered, but she continued working, her hands steady on her equipment, even as the sound of authoritative voices grew closer. What none of them realized was that this particular inspection would change everything aboard the USS Truman, because sometimes the quietest person in the room has seen the most, and sometimes the past refuses to stay buried, especially when it's marked on your skin in permanent ink. As the officers approached, Eliza Hart continued working on her engine, unaware that within the hour her carefully constructed anonymity would be shattered by a captain's sharp eyes and a tattoo that told a story she had hoped never to tell again. Captain Mason Trenton moved across the flight deck like a man accustomed to being in complete control of his environment. At 48, he had the kind of command presence that made junior officers straighten their spines from 50 yards away. His inspection routine was legendary throughout the fleet, methodical, thorough, and absolutely unforgiving of shortcuts or sloppy work. Behind him trailed a small constellation of officers, Commander Patricia Hayes from the Air Wing, Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez from Maintenance Operations, and Lieutenant Webb from Ship Security. They moved in formation, a testament to naval hierarchy and precision timing. "What's the status on aircraft readiness, XO?" Trenton asked without breaking stride. his eyes already scanning the array of Super Hornets positioned across the deck. 93% operational, Captain, Hayes responded crisply. The remaining 7% are undergoing routine maintenance cycles. No critical issues. Trenton nodded but continued his visual inspection. He had learned long ago that percentages on paper rarely told the whole story. The real truth was in the details, the condition of the equipment, the competence of the crew, the small signs that indicated whether his ship was truly ready for whatever the Navy might demand of her. They approached the section where Chief Ketterman waited with his maintenance team. Marshall stood at attention, his earlier swagger replaced by rigid military bearing. Ramirez maintained perfect posture beside him, clipboard ready, tools arranged in precise order. In the background, partially obscured by the bulk of an FA-18's engine housing, Eliza continued her work with quiet focus. Chief Ketterman, Trenton acknowledged. Report on your section's status. Sir, all aircraft in this section are mission-ready or on schedule for completion of routine maintenance. No outstanding discrepancies, no parts shortages, no safety issues. Ketterman's delivery was textbook perfect, confident but not arrogant, detailed but concise. Good. I want to see the maintenance logs for aircraft 304. Trenton had chosen the number seemingly at random, but Ramirez noticed his eyes were already scanning the area where that particular Super Hornet was positioned. Marshall stepped forward eagerly. Sir, I can walk you through the complete maintenance history on that aircraft. She's been in my section for the past 2. Belay that, Trenton said quietly, his attention fixed on something that had caught his eye. Who's working on the port engine? The question hung in the air for a moment. From their position, they could see Eliza's figure partially visible behind the engine housing, her hands moving with practiced efficiency, as she performed what appeared to be a routine systems check. That would be Maintenance Tech Hart, sir, Ketterman replied, though something in his tone suggested he would have preferred a different answer. Hart. Trenton repeated the name as if testing its weight. Bring her over here. Ketterman's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Sir, perhaps Petty Officer Marshall could better. I asked for Hart, Chief. Trenton's voice carried the quiet authority of a man accustomed to having his orders followed without debate. Hart, Ketterman called, front and center. Eliza emerged from behind the engine housing, wiping her hands on a maintenance rag. She moved with the same economical grace she had demonstrated all morning. But there was a subtle tension in her shoulders now, a wariness that hadn't been there before. She came to attention in front of the captain, her eyes fixed at a point somewhere over his left shoulder. Maintenance Tech 3rd Class Eliza Hart, sir. Trenton studied her for a moment, his experienced eyes taking in details that others might miss. The way she held herself spoke of more than basic military training. Her posture was correct but not rigid, alert but not nervous. Most enlisted personnel, especially lower-ranking techs, showed some degree of anxiety when being personally inspected by a ship's captain. Hart appeared calm, almost familiar with this kind of scrutiny. What's your assessment of aircraft 304's condition, Tech Hart? Eliza's response was immediate and precise. Sir, aircraft 304 is fully mission-capable. Engine maintenance was completed 40 minutes ago. All systems are within normal parameters. No discrepancies noted. And what specifically were you working on just now? Routine post-maintenance verification, sir. Checking torque specifications on engine mounts, verifying all connections are secure, confirming proper fluid levels. Trenton nodded slowly. The answer was exactly what he would expect from a competent technician, but something about Hart's delivery bothered him. Not the content. That was perfect. It was the way she said it, with a confidence that seemed to transcend her visible rank. Show me, he said. The order clearly surprised Ketterman and Marshall, but Eliza simply nodded and turned back toward the aircraft. As she moved, she unconsciously pushed up her sleeves to avoid getting them caught on any protruding components. The gesture was natural, automatic, and completely innocent. It was also the moment that changed everything. Trenton's eyes locked onto Eliza's left wrist with the intensity of a targeting system acquiring its mark. There, partially visible beneath her watch, was a tattoo that made his blood run cold. Stylized waves rendered in deep blue ink, with text underneath that he couldn't quite make out but somehow recognized. Most importantly, wrapped around those waves like a banner, was a design he had seen only once before, in a classified briefing that had made strong men pale. Stop. The word came out sharper than Trenton had intended. causing everyone in the immediate area to freeze. "Tech Hart, turn around." Eliza slowly pivoted to face him, and, for the first time since the inspection began, her composure showed the slightest crack. Her eyes, which had been professionally neutral, now held a flicker of something that might have been apprehension. "Your wrist," Trenton said quietly. "Show me your wrist." The flight deck around them had gone strangely quiet. Even the ambient noise of the ship seemed muted, as everyone present sensed that something significant was happening, though they couldn't identify what. Eliza hesitated for just a moment, then slowly extended her left arm. With deliberate movements, she unclasped her watch and slid it off, revealing the tattoo in its entirety. The design was even more intricate than Trenton had initially realized. The waves were masterfully rendered, seeming to move in the shifting light. Below them, in elegant script, were the Latin words in umbra, lux, in shadow, light. But it was the small symbol integrated into the wave pattern that made Trenton's mouth go dry, a stylized anchor, crossed with a trident, surrounded by 13 stars. Operation Blackwake. "Jesus Christ," Trenton breathed, the words escaping before he could stop them. Around him, his officers shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the gravity in their captain's voice, even if they didn't understand its source. Eliza's eyes met his directly for the first time, and in that moment, Trenton saw confirmation of what the tattoo had already told him. This wasn't just another maintenance tech. This was someone who had served in the shadows, someone who had done things for the Navy that would never appear in any official record. "Where did you get that tattoo, Tech Hart?" His voice was steady now, but those who knew him well would have recognized the steel beneath the calm. "Sir, it's from a previous assignment." Eliza's response was carefully neutral, but Trenton could see the calculation behind her eyes. She was deciding how much to reveal, how much she could safely say. "What kind of assignment?" "I'm not at liberty to discuss the details, sir." The silence that followed was deafening. Marshall and Ketterman exchanged confused glances, clearly out of their depth. Ramirez watched with growing fascination, pieces of a puzzle beginning to align in her mind. Commander Hayes stepped forward slightly, her hand moving unconsciously toward her sidearm, a reflexive response to the tension that now radiated from her captain. "Chief Ketterman," Trenton said without taking his eyes off Eliza, "I'm terminating this inspection. Return your crew to normal operations." "Sir?" Ketterman's confusion was evident. "You heard me, Chief. Normal operations. Now." As the officers began to disperse, their movements hurried and uncertain, Trenton stepped closer to Eliza. When he spoke, his voice was low enough that only she could hear. "Tech Hart, you will report to my quarters at 1,800 hours. And Tech?" "Yes, sir." "Bring your service record. All of it." Eliza nodded once, then stepped back and came to attention. "Aye, aye, sir." Trenton turned and walked away, his officers trailing behind him like confused satellites. But his mind was already racing ahead to the secure communication he would need to send, the files he would need to access, the questions that demanded immediate answers. Because if Operation Blackwake was represented on his ship, it meant that either the Navy had placed one of their most valuable assets in a maintenance shop as deep cover, or someone with access to the nation's darkest secrets had gone completely off the grid. Either way, Captain Mason Trenton realized that his routine inspection had just uncovered something that would require a great deal more than routine handling. In the secure confines of his quarters, Captain Trenton sat before his terminal, fingers poised over the keyboard as he stared at the clearance authorization screen. Around him, the familiar sounds of the ship continued, the distant hum of engines, the occasional footsteps in the corridor outside, the subtle creaks and groans of a massive vessel moving through the Pacific. But all of that felt distant now, muted by the gravity of what he was about to access. The service record request for Maintenance Tech 3rd Class Eliza Hart should have been straightforward. As commanding officer of the USS Truman, Trenton had the authority to review any personnel file aboard his ship. But something told him that Hart's file would be anything but standard. He entered his authorization codes and submitted the request. The response came back almost immediately, but not in the format he expected. Instead of the usual personnel data, he was greeted by a stark message that made his stomach tighten. Classified material, special access required Operation Blackwake personnel files warning. Unauthorized access constitutes violation of USC Title 18 Contact Naval Intelligence Command for clearance. Trenton leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. In 25 years of naval service, he had never encountered a personnel file that required intelligence clearance just to access. Whatever Eliza Hart had been involved in, it was buried deep enough to trigger automatic security protocols. He tried a different approach, accessing Hart's basic service record through the standard personnel system. This time, he got results, but they only deepened the mystery. Hart, Eliza Marie's service number. Redacted rank, maintenance tech, 3rd class current assignment, USS Truman CVN 75, previous assignments, redacted training records, redacted commendations, redacted security clearance, redacted. The file contained exactly 7 lines of unredacted information: her name, current rank, current assignment, enlistment date, birthplace, emergency contact, and blood type. Everything else, her entire military history, had been systematically erased or classified beyond his access level. Trenton had seen redacted files before, but never anything this comprehensive. It was as if someone had taken great care to erase every trace of Eliza Hart's military service while still maintaining her current assignment. The question was, why? He opened a secure communication channel and began typing a message to Naval Intelligence Command. The auto-generated security warning that appeared on his screen confirmed what he already suspected. His inquiry would trigger immediate attention from people far above his pay grade. To Naval Intelligence Command, Personnel Security Division from Captain M. Trenton, Colorado, USS Truman. Subject: Security Inquiry, Operation Blackwake Personnel Classification, Secret. Request clarification on security status of Maintenance Tech Hart, E. currently assigned to USS Truman. Personnel displays Operation Blackwake identification marking. Require guidance on handling and security implications. He hesitated for a moment before hitting send, knowing that the message would set wheels in motion that he might not be able to control. But the alternative, having a potentially compromised individual aboard his ship without understanding the risk, was unacceptable. The reply came back within minutes, far faster than normal intelligence communication. A single line that made his blood run cold. Stand by for immediate deployment of investigative team. Maintain current security protocols. Do not discuss with personnel pending arrival of Commander Liao. Trenton closed the secure channel and sat back, the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. In less than 2 hours, his routine inspection had evolved into a potential security incident that now involved naval intelligence. Whatever Hart's story was, it was significant enough to warrant immediate intervention from some very serious people. Meanwhile, 3 decks below, word of the unusual inspection was spreading through the maintenance sections like wildfire. The crew had witnessed their captain's reaction to Hart's tattoo, seen the way the inspection had been abruptly terminated, felt the tension that had radiated from the command group. In the absence of facts, speculation flourished. "I'm telling you, something's not right about Hart," Marshall said to a small group gathered around the coffee station. Captain took one look at that ink and went white as a sheet. Nobody reacts like that to a normal tattoo. Petty Officer 2nd Class Jenkins, a seasoned mechanic with 12 years aboard carriers, shook his head. "You're reading too much into it, Marshall. Maybe the captain just doesn't approve of visible tattoos. You know how strict he is about regulations." "Nah, man, this was different," Marshall insisted. "I've seen officers pissed off about uniform violations. This wasn't that. This was like he recognized something that scared him." Ramirez listened from nearby, ostensibly focused on her maintenance manual, but actually absorbing every word. She had been thinking about Hart's tattoo since the inspection, trying to reconcile the elaborate design with what she knew about the quiet technician. The Latin words particularly intrigued her. In Umbra, Lux wasn't the kind of phrase someone chose lightly for permanent body art. "Maybe she's some kind of spy," suggested Airman Rodriguez, a 19-year-old on his first deployment who consumed too many action movies during off-duty hours, like Undercover or something. "Maybe she's here to watch us." "Spy for who?" Jenkins laughed. "The Navy? She is Navy, you moron." "But what if she's not?" Rodriguez pressed. "What if she's like foreign intelligence or something? What if that tattoo is some kind of code?" Marshall nodded eagerly. That would explain why she keeps to herself, why she never talks about her background. Hell, now that I think about it, has anyone ever heard her talk about where she's from? Her family? Anything? The question hung in the air, and Ramirez realized with surprise that Marshall was right. In the 8 months Hart had been assigned to their section, she had never volunteered personal information. She was professional, competent, helpful when asked direct questions about work, but utterly opaque about her life, her history, her motivations. "I think you're all paranoid," Ramirez said finally, though her voice lacked conviction. "Hart's a good tech, one of the best I've seen. Maybe she just values her privacy." "Privacy's one thing," Marshall shot back. "But this is something else. Mark my words, we haven't seen the last of this. Something's about to come down, and Hart's right in the middle of it." As if summoned by his words, Chief Ketterman appeared in the maintenance bay. His expression was grim, his usual brusque efficiency replaced by something that looked almost like anxiety. "Listen up," he called, gathering the scattered personnel. "Change of plans for the rest of the day. We're implementing enhanced security protocols effective immediately. That means tools get checked out and checked in with me personally. No personnel move between sections without authorization. And if anyone asks you questions about crew members, assignments, or operations, you refer them to me immediately. No exceptions." The crew exchanged glances, their earlier speculation taking on a more serious tone. Enhanced security protocols weren't implemented lightly aboard a carrier. "Chief," Jenkins ventured, "this have anything to do with the inspection this morning?" Ketterman's jaw tightened. "It has to do with maintaining proper security aboard this vessel. That's all you need to know. Now get back to work, and remember what I said about questions." Quote, as the crew dispersed, Ramirez caught sight of Hart emerging from the tool storage area, her arms full of equipment. She moved with the same quiet efficiency as always, but something in her posture suggested heightened awareness. She was being careful, more careful than usual, and that in itself was telling. Their eyes met briefly across the bay, and Ramirez saw something there that confirmed her growing suspicions. Hart wasn't just private. She was actively concealing something. The question was whether that something was dangerous to the ship and crew, or dangerous to Hart herself. As the afternoon wore on, an undercurrent of tension ran through the maintenance sections. Personnel found themselves glancing toward Hart more often, watching for signs of whatever had triggered the morning's events. Conversations were more guarded, work rhythms slightly off, the easy camaraderie of the maintenance crew replaced by an atmosphere of suspicion and uncertainty. Hart seemed oblivious to the scrutiny, but Ramirez noticed that she had positioned herself with clear sightlines to the exits, that her tools were arranged for quick access, that she moved with the kind of situational awareness that went far beyond standard Navy training. Whatever was coming, Eliza Hart was ready for it. The question was whether the rest of them were ready for what her secrets might reveal. In his quarters, Captain Trenton continued reviewing what little information he could access, preparing for the arrival of Commander Liao and whatever revelations would follow. But deep in his gut, he already knew that the quiet technician working in his maintenance bay was about to turn his orderly ship upside down. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The only question was how much of the truth any of them were prepared to handle. Commander Reggie Liao arrived aboard the USS Truman like a storm front, sudden, unavoidable, and carrying the promise of turbulence. At 42, he possessed the kind of lean intensity that made junior officers check their uniforms twice and senior personnel choose their words carefully. His reputation within naval intelligence was built on an ability to extract truth from the most reluctant sources, and his presence aboard any vessel typically meant someone's career was about to take a dramatic turn. Liao's helicopter had touched down on the flight deck at 0347 hours, well before the morning watch change. By 0400, he had established himself in one of the ship's secure conference rooms, transforming the sterile space into an impromptu interrogation center. The room was small, windowless, and deliberately uncomfortable. 3 metal chairs around a bolted-down table, fluorescent lighting that cast harsh shadows, and walls that seemed to absorb sound and hope in equal measure. At precisely 0800 hours, Eliza Hart reported as ordered. She stood at attention outside the conference room door, Her service record, what little of it remained unredacted, clutched in her left hand. The Marine standing guard barely glanced at her before opening the door and gesturing her inside. "Maintenance Tech Hart, reporting as ordered, sir." Liao didn't look up immediately. He was studying a tablet, his fingers swiping through what appeared to be classified documents. When he finally raised his eyes, they held the kind of calculated assessment that made Eliza feel like a specimen under a microscope. "Sit." Eliza took the chair across from him, noting automatically that it positioned her with her back to the door, a subtle psychological tactic designed to increase anxiety. She placed her hands flat on the table, maintained eye contact, and waited. "Do you know why you're here, Tech Hart?" "I assume it has to do with my tattoo, sir." "Your tattoo." Liao's voice carried a note of skepticism. "Is that what we're calling it? A tattoo?" "That's what it is, sir." Liao leaned back in his chair, his gaze never wavering from her face. "Operation Blackwake! Ring any bells?" Eliza's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. A subtle stiffening that spoke of old training reasserting itself. "I'm familiar with the designation, sir." "Familiar?" Liao repeated the word as if tasting something unpleasant. "How familiar?" "I was assigned to support operations under that classification." Support operations. Another repetition, another layer of skepticism. What kind of support? Technical support, sir. Engineering and mechanical systems. Liao set down his tablet and leaned forward, his elbows on the table. Tech Hart, let me explain something to you. Operation Blackwake doesn't exist. According to every official record, every database, every piece of documentation in the entire Navy system, there has never been an operation by that name. So when I see someone wearing a tattoo that identifies them as a participant in something that never happened, it raises questions. I understand, sir. Do you? Because from where I sit, there are only a few possible explanations. Either you're delusional and believe you participated in something that existed only in your imagination, or you're part of some kind of elaborate deception, or, he paused, studying her face for any reaction, or you actually were involved in something so classified that even its existence has been erased from official records. Eliza remained silent, her hands still flat on the table. Which is it, Tech Hart? I did what I was ordered to do, sir. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give, sir. Liao's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He had interrogated enough people to recognize when someone was operating under restrictions that went beyond normal military protocol. Hart wasn't being evasive out of stubbornness or fear. She was following training that ran deeper than her current rank suggested. Let's try a different approach. The tattoo on your wrist, when did you get it? 2017, sir. Where? I don't recall the specific location, sir. You don't recall getting a permanent tattoo with classified military symbology? The details are unclear, sir. Liao stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the metal floor. He began pacing the small confines of the room, a predatory movement designed to increase pressure. Tech Hart, I've reviewed what's left of your service record. It's been sanitized more thoroughly than a surgical suite. Someone went to considerable trouble to erase your military history while keeping you active in the system. That kind of operation requires authorization from the highest levels of command. He stopped pacing and turned to face her directly. So either you're a security risk who somehow slipped through every screening protocol we have, or you're someone important enough that your very existence is classified. Which brings me to my next question. Who else knows about your background? Sir? Your current assignment, your fellow crew members. Have you told anyone about your previous service? No, sir. Anyone ever ask questions about your tattoo? Not until yesterday, sir. What about Captain Trenton? What was his reaction when he saw the marking? For the first time since entering the room, Eliza hesitated. The captain appeared. Surprised, sir. Surprised? Did he say anything? He asked about the tattoo, sir, asked where I got it. And what did you tell him? That it was from a previous assignment, sir. Liao resumed his seat, his eyes never leaving her face. Tech Hart, I'm going to be very direct with you. Your presence aboard this vessel represents a potential security breach of extraordinary magnitude. If you are who your tattoo suggests you are, then you have access to information that could compromise national security. If you're not who you appear to be, then you're an infiltrator who somehow acquired classified military symbology. He leaned forward again, his voice dropping to just above a whisper. Either way, you're a problem that needs to be resolved. Now, I can resolve this problem through official channels, which would involve transferring you to a secure facility for extended interrogation, or you can help me understand what we're dealing with. Your choice. The silence that followed stretched for nearly a minute. Eliza's breathing remained steady, her posture unchanged, but something in her eyes suggested she was weighing options that went far beyond this room. "Sir," she said finally, "I served my country to the best of my ability. I followed orders, completed my assignments, and maintained operational security. If my presence aboard this vessel represents a security concern, then I accept whatever action command deems appropriate." That's still not an answer. "It's the only answer I'm authorized to give, sir." Liao stared at her for a long moment, then reached for his tablet again. "Very well, Hart. You're dismissed. Return to your duties, but consider yourself under close observation. And Tech?" "Yes, sir?" "Don't even think about disappearing. We'll be watching." Eliza stood, came to attention, and performed a precise about-face. As she reached for the door handle, Liao spoke again. "One more thing. The Latin phrase on your tattoo, in umbra lux, do you know what it means?" Without turning around, Eliza replied, "In shadow, light, sir." "Indeed. The question is whether you're the shadow or the light." The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Liao alone with his suspicions and a growing certainty that Eliza Hart was far more than she appeared to be. But whether that made her an asset or a threat remained to be determined. As Eliza walked through the ship's corridors back to her duty station, she felt the weight of scrutiny from every direction. Word of the intelligence officer's arrival had spread through the crew like wildfire, and she could sense the speculation that followed her movement. Some looked at her with suspicion, others with curiosity, but all with the kind of attention she had spent years learning to avoid. She made her way to the maintenance bay, where the familiar sounds and smells of aircraft repair provided a small measure of comfort. Here, at least, she could lose herself in work that made sense, problems that had clear solutions, machinery that responded to skill and knowledge rather than politics and suspicion. But even as she immersed herself in routine maintenance, Eliza Hart knew that her carefully constructed anonymity was crumbling. The past she had tried so hard to leave behind was catching up, and soon she would have to decide whether to run again or finally stand and face the consequences of who she used to be. Commander Liao returned to his temporary quarters aboard the USS Truman with more questions than answers. His interrogation of Hart had yielded nothing concrete, yet everything about her responses suggested training that went far beyond standard Navy protocol. The way she held herself, the precision of her speech, the carefully neutral expressions, all pointed to someone who had been taught to resist interrogation by professionals. His secure communications setup hummed quietly in the corner of the room, encrypted channels already established with Naval Intelligence Command. But before filing his preliminary report, Liao decided to pursue one more avenue of investigation. If Operation Blackwake had existed in some form, there would be traces, personnel files, command structures, operational records. The key was knowing where to look and having the clearance to access materials that most people weren't even supposed to know existed. He began with a deep search of classified personnel databases, using Hart's service number and timeline to identify potential commanding officers from 2016 to 2018. The search parameters were intentionally broad, designed to catch any operational designation that might have been renamed, reclassified, or buried under different security protocols. The results were frustratingly sparse. Hart's service record remained heavily redacted, but the search algorithm identified several personnel who had served in unspecified special operations support roles during the relevant time frame. Most of the files were inaccessible even with his clearance level, but one name appeared with partial availability: Commander Valerie Costa, currently assigned to Naval Special Warfare Command. Liao's fingers hesitated over the keyboard. Costa's name was familiar. He had heard it mentioned in certain circles, always with the kind of respect reserved for officers who had seen combat and proven themselves under fire. If she had been involved with whatever Hart had done, reaching out to her would either provide crucial intelligence or trigger security protocols that would end his investigation immediately. He decided to take the risk. The secure voice communication request went through 3 levels of encryption before connecting. When Costa's voice came through the speakers, it carried the crisp authority of someone accustomed to making life-or-death decisions in seconds. Commander Costa speaking. Commander, this is Commander Liao, Naval Intelligence. I'm conducting a security investigation aboard the USS Truman and require information about a former member of your command. There was a pause, long enough for Liao to wonder if the connection had been lost. When Costa spoke again, her tone had shifted subtly, still professional, but with an undercurrent of wariness. What's the nature of your investigation, Commander? I have a maintenance tech 3rd class aboard this vessel who displays identification marking associated with Operation Blackwake. I need to determine if this individual represents a security risk. Another pause, longer this time. In the background, Liao could hear what sounded like office activity, voices, phones, the general buzz of a busy command center. What's the individual's name? Hart. Eliza Hart. The silence that followed was profound. Liao found himself leaning forward, straining to catch any sound from the other end of the connection. When Costa finally spoke, her voice carried a weight that made him sit up straighter. Commander Liao, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to listen very carefully. If Eliza Hart is aboard your vessel, you need to understand that you're damn lucky to have her there. Can you elaborate on that, Commander? What I can tell you is that Tech Hart, and yes, she was Tech Hart when I knew her, saved more lives and prevented more disasters than most officers accomplish in their entire careers. What I cannot tell you is the specific nature of her operations, because those details remain classified at levels that require presidential authorization to access. Liao felt a chill run down his spine. Presidential authorization meant operations that went beyond normal military classification, operations that touched on national security at the highest levels. Commander, can you confirm whether she served under Operation Blackwake designation? I can confirm that she served under my command during operations that were critical to national security. I can also confirm that she left active special operations at her own request, with full honors and complete clearance from psychological evaluation. Why did she leave? Costa's voice hardened. Because she lost people, Commander. Good people who trusted her to bring them home safely. She blamed herself for things that were beyond her control, and she requested reassignment to duties where the only life at risk would be her own. The pieces began falling into place in Liao's mind. Hart's isolation, her reluctance to engage with her fellow crew members, her apparent overqualification for her current position, all consistent with someone carrying survivor's guilt and trying to find purpose in work that didn't involve life-or-death decisions for others. Can you provide any specific examples of her service record? One example I can share because it's already partially documented in the Truman's own operational records. May 2017, your ship experienced a complete failure of the catapult launch system while conducting operations in the South China Sea. The failure occurred during a critical mission launch, and standard repair procedures would have taken the carrier out of action for minimum 72 hours. Liao accessed his tablet, pulling up historical operational reports. He found the incident Costa was referencing, a mechanical failure that had been resolved with unusual speed and efficiency. I'm looking at that report now, Commander. It shows the system was restored to full operation in under 6 hours. That's correct. What the report doesn't show is that the repair required a complete rebuild of the launch mechanism's control systems using improvised components and non-standard procedures. The work was performed by a single technician working without backup or support, in conditions that put her at significant personal risk. Hart. She identified the failure point, designed a workaround using available materials, and implemented the solution while the ship was still conducting combat operations. Without her intervention, the Truman would have been forced to withdraw from its operational area, potentially compromising an entire theater of operations. Liao scrolled through the operational report, finding mention of, quote, exceptional technical performance by maintenance personnel, but no specific names or details, the kind of deliberate omission that suggested classified involvement. Why isn't this documented in her service record? Because acknowledging her presence aboard the Truman during that operation would have revealed details about the mission that remained classified. Her contribution was noted in sealed reports that you don't have clearance to access. And the tattoo? Costa's voice softened slightly. The tattoo represents membership in a unit that officially never existed. Every member of that unit received the marking before deployment on operations that were deemed too sensitive for normal military record-keeping. The Latin phrase, in umbra lux, was our unit motto. In shadow, light. Exactly. We operated in the shadows so that others could live in the light. Hart understood that better than most. Liao leaned back in his chair, his assessment of the situation shifting dramatically. Commander, in your professional opinion, does Hart represent any kind of security risk? Commander Liao, let me be very clear about something. Eliza Hart has clearance levels that exceed most flag officers. She has been exposed to operational details that could compromise national security if disclosed inappropriately. But she has also proven her loyalty and discretion under circumstances that would break most people. Costa paused, and when she continued, her voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. If that woman is working quietly in your maintenance section, keeping her head down and doing her job without complaint, then you should thank whatever powers you believe in and leave her alone. Don't push her, don't investigate her, and for God's sake, don't treat her like a threat. Understood, Commander. I hope you do understand, Commander Liao, because if you screw this up, if you damage someone who has already sacrificed more than you can imagine for this country, you'll answer to me personally. Quote. The connection terminated with a soft click, leaving Liao alone with the weight of Costa's words and a completely revised understanding of the quiet technician he had interrogated hours earlier. Hart wasn't a security risk. She was a national asset who had chosen anonymity over recognition, service over glory. He reached for his secure terminal and began drafting a new report, one that would ensure Eliza Hart could continue her chosen path without further interference from naval intelligence. Some secrets, he was beginning to understand, were worth keeping. The emergency drill alarm began at 0347 hours, cutting through the pre-dawn quiet of the USS Truman like a blade. Throughout the ship, personnel bolted from bunks, threw on uniforms, and ran to emergency stations with the practiced efficiency of a crew that had drilled this scenario dozens of times. But this morning was different. This morning, the alarm wasn't announcing a drill. In the maintenance bay, Eliza Hart had been working the night shift, performing routine diagnostics on aircraft 308 and F/A-18 Super Hornet scheduled for morning operations. The emergency klaxons found her elbow deep in the aircraft's avionics bay, her hands steady on delicate circuitry even as chaos erupted around her. All hands, the ship's announcement system crackled to life. This is not a drill. Emergency stations. Flight deck personnel report immediately for emergency aircraft recovery. Chief Ketterman burst into the maintenance bay, his uniform hastily thrown on, his usually perfectly maintained appearance disheveled. Hart, Rodriguez, Marshall! We've got a real situation here. Aircraft 314 is coming in hot with hydraulic failure and potential engine fire. All available maintenance personnel to the flight deck now. The crew mobilized with impressive speed, grabbing emergency equipment and rushing toward the deck access. But as they reached the exit, another announcement stopped them cold. Emergency! Emergency on aircraft 308, engine failure during startup sequence. All personnel clear the immediate area. Fire suppression teams to Station 3 immediately. Eliza looked up from her work position, her hands still inside the avionics bay of the very aircraft mentioned in the announcement. Around her, she could see the telltale signs of a catastrophic system failure. Warning lights flashing red across the aircraft's status panel, the smell of overheating electronics, and a high-pitched whine from the engine compartment that spoke of imminent mechanical breakdown. Jesus Christ, Marshall breathed, backing away from the aircraft. That's the plane Hart's been working on. Ketterman spun around, his face pale in the emergency lighting. Hart, get away from that aircraft now! If the engine's going to blow... It's not going to blow, Eliza said quietly, her voice cutting through the rising panic. She was studying the status displays with the kind of focused intensity that blocked out everything else. Engine temperature is elevated but within tolerance. This is a control system failure, not mechanical damage. The hell it is, I can smell burning electronics. That's the backup navigation computer overheating because it's trying to compensate for the primary system failure. Eliza's hands moved with practiced confidence, tracing wiring harnesses and checking connections. The engine failure warning is false. It's being triggered by corrupted data from the flight control computer. Around them, the maintenance bay had erupted into controlled chaos. Emergency personnel were suiting up in fire-resistant gear. Foam suppression systems were being moved into position, and senior officers were barking orders that no one seemed able to follow coherently. Commander Hayes arrived at a run, her face grim. "Chief, what's the status?" "Ma'am, we've got what appears to be an engine failure on 308, possibly related to the maintenance work being performed by—" "It's not an engine failure," Eliza interrupted, her voice carrying a note of authority that made everyone pause. "It's a cascading system failure triggered by a corrupted software update to the flight control computer. The engine is fine, but the aircraft's brain thinks it's dying." Hayes looked from Ketterman to Eliza, clearly trying to assess which source of information to trust. "Are you certain of that assessment, Tech Hart?" "Yes, ma'am. I can fix it, but I need everyone to stop treating this like a fire emergency and start treating it like a computer problem." "Absolutely not," Ketterman interjected. "Hart, you are not qualified to make that kind of assessment. We follow emergency protocols, and emergency protocols say we evacuate the area and let the specialists handle it." Quote, "I am a specialist," Eliza said quietly, but her words carried across the bay with surprising force. "And if you evacuate this area and wait for outside specialists, this aircraft will be down for minimum 72 hours while they replace every computer system aboard." Hayes studied Eliza's face, noting the calm confidence that seemed incongruous with her visible rank. "How long would it take you to fix it?" 20 minutes. Maybe 30 if the corruption is spread to the backup systems." "That's impossible," Marshall protested. "Nobody can diagnose and repair a cascading system failure that fast." Eliza turned to look at him directly, and for the first time since he had known her, Marshall saw something in her eyes that made him step back involuntarily. It wasn't anger or frustration. It was the kind of absolute certainty that came from experience he couldn't begin to imagine. "Watch me," she said simply. Without waiting for authorization, Eliza began moving through the aircraft's systems with a speed and precision that left the watching crew speechless. Her hands seemed to know exactly where every component was located, every connection point, every potential failure mode. She pulled access panels with practiced efficiency, traced circuitry with movements that suggested deep familiarity, and began making adjustments that looked more like performance art than mechanical repair. "Hart," Ketterman said weakly, "you need to stop what you're doing and follow." "Chief," Commander Hayes interrupted, "let her work." For the next 27 minutes, the maintenance bay became a showcase for expertise that transcended normal military training. Eliza moved through the aircraft systems like a surgeon, identifying problems before they became critical, rerouting connections to bypass damaged components, and rebuilding the flight control architecture with an elegance that made complex technology look simple. Ramirez watched in fascination as Eliza pulled a diagnostic tablet from her toolkit, not standard Navy equipment, but something that looked far more advanced than anything she had seen before. The device interfaced with the aircraft's computers in ways that seemed almost magical, displaying information that Ramirez didn't recognize, but that clearly meant something significant to Eliza. "There," Eliza said finally, stepping back from the aircraft. "Primary flight control computer restored to full function. Backup systems verified operational. All safety interlocks functioning normally." She reached for the engine startup controls, and before anyone could protest, initiated the startup sequence. The engine spooled up smoothly, all status lights showing green. The ominous whining and warning alarms replaced by the steady hum of properly functioning machinery. The silence that followed was profound. Even the ambient noise of the ship seemed muted as everyone in the bay tried to process what they had just witnessed. "How?" Marshall asked finally. "How did you know how to do that?" Eliza was already putting her tools away, her movements efficient and automatic. "Because I've done it before." "Where? When? Hart? That was like watching someone perform magic." For just a moment, Eliza's professional composure slipped, and something complex flickered across her features, pride warring with regret, competence shadowed by memory. "A long time ago," she said quietly, "in places that don't appear on any map." Commander Hayes stepped forward, her expression thoughtful. "Tech Hart, that was exceptional work. I've never seen anyone diagnose and repair a cascading system failure that quickly." "Thank you, ma'am." "Where did you learn those procedures?" Eliza met her gaze steadily. "Previous assignment, ma'am." Hayes nodded slowly, clearly recognizing that she wasn't going to get a more detailed answer. "Well, whatever your previous assignment was, the Navy is fortunate to have retained your expertise." As the emergency was officially declared resolved and normal operations resumed, word of Eliza's performance began spreading through the ship. The crew who had witnessed her work spoke in hushed, almost reverent tones about the quiet tech who had accomplished something that should have been impossible. Ramirez found herself looking at Eliza with new eyes. The woman she had thought she knew, the reserved, competent, but unremarkable maintenance tech, had revealed capabilities that suggested a background far beyond anything she had imagined. "Hart," she said quietly as they secured the maintenance bay, "that was incredible." Eliza glanced at her, and for a moment Ramirez thought she saw something like gratitude in the older woman's eyes. "Just doing my job, Ramirez." "No," Ramirez said firmly. "That wasn't just doing your job. That was something else entirely." Eliza paused in her tool inventory, considering her words carefully. "Sometimes," she said finally, "the job requires more than what's in the manual." As the maintenance crew dispersed to their normal duties, the atmosphere aboard the USS Truman had shifted subtly. The quiet tech who had been working anonymously in their midst was no longer invisible. She had revealed herself to be someone with capabilities that demanded respect, skills that transcended rank, and knowledge that suggested a story far more complex than any of them had imagined. And in the ship's intelligence office, Commander Liao reviewed the incident reports with growing certainty that Eliza Hart was exactly who Commander Costa had suggested she was. A national asset choosing to serve in shadows, bringing light to situations that others couldn't even see. The maintenance bay had finally quieted after the morning's emergency, but Eliza Hart found no peace in the return to routine. As she worked through her normal duties, checking fluid levels, inspecting electrical connections, updating maintenance logs, her mind kept circling back to the moment when she had stepped forward to fix aircraft 308. It had felt natural, instinctive, like muscle memory taking over from conscious thought. But it had also torn open carefully sealed compartments in her mind, releasing memories she had spent years learning to contain. It was during her lunch break in the solitude of her small quarters that she discovered the envelope. Someone had slipped it under her door while she was on duty, a plain manila envelope with no markings, no return address, no indication of its origin. Her name was written across the front in handwriting she didn't immediately recognize, though something about the precise lettering seemed familiar. Eliza stared at the envelope for a long moment before picking it up. In her world, unexpected deliveries rarely brought good news. They brought new orders, security investigations, or reminders of things better left buried. But the weight of this envelope was different. Not the bureaucratic heft of official documents, but something lighter, more personal. She opened it carefully, her fingers finding a single object inside, a military patch, folded in tissue paper, with a brief handwritten note. The patch was one she recognized with painful clarity, black background with silver threading, depicting stylized waves beneath a crescent moon. Around the border, 13 small stars representing the original members of the unit. At the bottom, in elegant script, the words "In Umbra Lux." It was identical to the design tattooed on her wrist, but this was the original, the actual patch she had worn during operations that officially never existed. The note was brief, written in the same precise handwriting as her name on the envelope. "Hart, you left the field, you never left the fight. Some shadows are cast by choice, but all light serves a purpose. Keep doing what you do best. VC." Eliza's hands trembled slightly as she read the words again. VC, Commander Valerie Costa. The only person alive who truly understood what the patch represented, what it had cost to earn it, and why Eliza had ultimately walked away from everything it symbolized. She sank onto her narrow bunk, the patch heavy in her hands despite weighing only a few ounces. Suddenly, she was back in the South China Sea, May 2017, aboard a different version of the USS Truman, one carrying a full complement of special operations personnel on a mission that would never appear in any official record. The memory hit her with unexpected force, the carrier's catapult system failing at the worst possible moment, just as a critical launch window opened for an operation that couldn't be delayed. 6 months of planning, dozens of lives hanging in the balance, and a mechanical failure that should have ended everything. She remembered crawling through spaces barely wide enough for a human body, her hands working by feel in near total darkness, rewiring systems that hadn't been designed for the modification she was making. Above her, she could hear the controlled chaos of a mission falling apart, voices tight with tension, countdowns being held, aircraft sitting loaded and ready for a launch that might never come. But the worst memory wasn't the technical challenge or the time pressure. It was the weight of knowing that if she failed, 6 operators would die in a hostile territory because they couldn't be extracted on schedule. 6 people who trusted her to keep the machinery running, to solve the unsolvable, to make the impossible possible. She had succeeded that night. The catapult system had roared back to life with minutes to spare, the aircraft had launched, and the mission had proceeded as planned. But 3 days later, during a routine maintenance operation on the same system, Petty Officer First Class Maria Santos had been killed when a hydraulic line failed catastrophically. Santos had been following Eliza's improvised repair procedures, trying to make a temporary fix permanent. The modification that had saved the mission had created a weak point that claimed the life of a 24-year-old tech from Phoenix who had joined the Navy to pay for college. Eliza had been cleared of any wrongdoing. The official investigation concluded that Santos had made an error in procedure. But Eliza knew the truth. Her jury-rigged repair had worked perfectly for its intended purpose, but hadn't been designed for long-term use. She had saved 6 operators and killed 1 tech, and the mathematics of that exchange would haunt her for the rest of her life. That was when she had requested reassignment. Not because she couldn't handle the pressure or the responsibility, but because she couldn't bear the weight of making life-or-death decisions for other people. Better to work alone, to risk only her own life, to use her skills in situations where failure would harm only herself. Now sitting in her quarters aboard the very ship where it had all begun, Eliza confronted the question that had been haunting her since Commander Liao's interrogation. Was she hiding from her past, or was she still serving it? The patch in her hands represented everything she had lost: the camaraderie of a unit that understood the cost of their work, the clarity of purpose that came from missions where success and failure were measured in lives saved, the pride of being part of something larger than herself. But it also represented everything she had sacrificed: the innocence of believing that good intentions guaranteed good outcomes, the luxury of thinking that skill alone could prevent tragedy, the comfort of sleeping without dreams of hydraulic lines and bright red blood. A soft knock on her door interrupted her reverie. She quickly folded the patch back into its tissue paper and slipped it into her pocket before opening the door. Specialist Ramirez stood in the corridor, her expression uncertain but determined. "Hart? I hope I'm not bothering you, but I wanted to talk to you about what happened this morning. Come in." Eliza stepped aside, noting that Ramirez looked nervous but not afraid. That was something, at least. Ramirez entered the small quarters and remained standing, her hands clasped behind her back in a posture that suggested formal respect rather than casual conversation. "I wanted to thank you," she said simply. "What you did this morning, that was incredible. I've never seen anyone work like that." "Just doing my job, Ramirez." "No, ma'am, it wasn't. I've been working maintenance for 3 years, and I've never seen anyone diagnose a cascading system failure that quickly. Where did you learn to do that?" Eliza studied the younger woman's face, seeing genuine curiosity and respect rather than suspicion or fear. It was a refreshing change from the scrutiny she had been enduring since the inspection. "Experience," she said finally. "Sometimes the best teacher is necessity." "But where? I mean, I've looked at your visible service record, and there's nothing there that explains how you learned those procedures. Were you in special operations? Intelligence? Some kind of advanced technical training program?" The questions were the same ones that Commander Liao had asked, but coming from Ramirez, they felt different. Not interrogative, but admiring. Not threatening, but genuinely interested. "Ramirez," Eliza said gently, "some things are better left in the past." "I understand that, ma'am. I really do. But I also understand that you're wasted in our maintenance section. You should be training other techs, or working on advanced systems, or, I don't know, something that actually challenges you." Eliza felt the patch in her pocket, a tangible reminder of a time when her work had indeed been challenging, meaningful, and ultimately tragic. "I'm exactly where I need to be." "But why? You're the best tech I've ever seen, and you're working routine maintenance like someone fresh out of technical school. It doesn't make sense." For a moment, Eliza considered telling her the truth, about Operation Blackwake, about the missions that never happened, about the weight of making decisions that determined who lived and who died. But Ramirez was young, enthusiastic, still believing that skill and dedication were enough to solve any problem. Eliza remembered being that age, having that confidence, thinking that excellence was its own reward. "Sometimes," she said instead, "the most important work is the work that nobody notices. Keeping the machinery running, making sure everything works the way it's supposed to, preventing problems before they become disasters. That's not glamorous, but it matters." Ramirez nodded slowly, though her expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. "If you say so, ma'am, but I want you to know that what you did this morning, it meant something. To all of us." After Ramirez left, Eliza sat back down on her bunk and pulled out the patch again. Costa's note lay beside it, its message both an accusation and an affirmation. You left the field. You never left the fight. Maybe that was true. Maybe her current assignment wasn't hiding from her past, but extending it in a different form. Maybe the quiet competence she brought to routine maintenance was just another way of serving in the shadows, bringing light to situations that others took for granted. She thought about Aircraft 308, about the cascading system failure that could have grounded the ship for days, about the emergency response that had turned chaotic until she stepped forward with knowledge earned through blood and sacrifice. She had prevented a disaster that morning, just as she had prevented disasters in darker places under worse circumstances. The difference was that this time, nobody had died. This time, her knowledge had been purely constructive, purely beneficial, purely about making things work rather than making hard choices about who would live and who wouldn't. Eliza carefully folded the patch and slipped it into the pocket of her tool bag, not displayed, not hidden, but carried as a reminder of who she had been and who she still was. She wouldn't wear it openly, wouldn't reclaim the recognition and authority it represented, but she wouldn't throw it away either. Sometimes the best way to honor the past was to carry it quietly into the future, letting its lessons guide your actions without letting its weight crush your spirit. And sometimes the most important light was the kind that shone in shadows, illuminating the path for others without drawing attention to itself. As she prepared to return to duty, Eliza Hart made peace with the paradox that had defined her life since leaving Operation Blackwake. She was simultaneously running from her past and living it every day, hiding her capabilities while using them constantly, serving in anonymity while carrying the weight of recognition she would never claim. It wasn't the life she had planned, but it was the life she had chosen, and for the first time in years that felt like enough. The summons came at 1,547 hours, delivered by Lieutenant Webb with an expression that suggested he wasn't entirely sure what he was announcing. All maintenance personnel, Section C, report to Flight Deck Station 3 immediately. Captain's orders. Quote, Chief Ketterman looked up from his desk, his weathered face creasing with confusion. All personnel? What's this about, Lieutenant? Can't say, Chief. Just that the captain wants everyone there in 15 minutes. Full work uniforms, tool belts secured. As Webb departed, the maintenance bay erupted in nervous chatter. Summons to the flight deck rarely meant good news, especially when they involved the entire section and came directly from the captain. The crew had endured enough unusual attention over the past few days to last them several deployments. This has got to be about Hart, Marshall muttered as he checked his uniform for regulation compliance. First the inspection, then the intelligence guy, now this. Whatever's going on, it's all connected to her. Ramirez glanced toward where Eliza was methodically securing her tools, apparently unaffected by the speculation swirling around her. Maybe it's not about her specifically. Maybe it's about the emergency response yesterday. Recognition for good work. Since when does the captain call deck formations to hand out attaboys? Airman Rodriguez shook his head. Something big is happening. Eliza finished organizing her toolkit and stood, her movements precise and economical as always. But those who had learned to read her subtle signs, Ramirez chief among them, noticed the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes automatically scanned for exits, the careful positioning that kept her back to no one. Hart, Ketterman called as the section prepared to move out. You stick close to me during whatever this is. I don't want any complications. Understood, Chief. The walk to Flight Deck Station 3 took them through the heart of the carrier, past berthing areas where off-duty personnel watched their passage with curiosity, through mess halls where conversations stopped as they passed. Word of the unusual formation had spread throughout the ship, and the atmosphere carried the electric anticipation that preceded significant announcements. When they emerged onto the flight deck, Eliza was struck by the scene awaiting them. Captain Trenton stood at the center of Station 3, flanked by Commander Hayes and several other senior officers. But this wasn't the usual formal inspection lineup. The officers were arranged more casually, and Trenton himself appeared relaxed rather than ceremonial. Around the designated area, other personnel had gathered as well. Flight crew, deck handlers, even some personnel from sections that had no direct connection to maintenance operations. It was as if word had spread that something significant was about to happen, drawing spectators who didn't want to miss it. "Section C maintenance, fall in!" Ketterman called, and his people arranged themselves in the loose formation appropriate for an informal deck gathering. Eliza found herself in the second rank, partially hidden behind Marshall's broader frame, which suited her perfectly. Captain Trenton stepped forward, his bearing authoritative but somehow warmer than usual. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly across the deck without seeming forced or overly loud. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've called you here today because it's come to my attention that this ship has been operating under a significant misunderstanding." He paused, letting his eyes sweep across the assembled personnel. "For the past several months, we have had among us an individual whose service record and capabilities have been understated. Due to security considerations that I'm not at liberty to discuss, this person has been serving in a capacity well below her actual qualifications and experience." Eliza felt her stomach tighten. Around her she could sense the crew's attention focusing, speculation becoming certainty about who the captain was discussing. Yesterday morning, during an aircraft emergency that could have resulted in significant operational delays, this individual demonstrated technical expertise that prevented what would have been a 72-hour maintenance crisis. She did so quickly, efficiently, and with a level of skill that frankly astounded the officers present. Trenton's gaze found Eliza through the ranks, though she had tried to make herself invisible behind Marshall. "Tech Hart, step forward, please." The silence that followed was profound. Even the ambient noise of the carrier seemed muted as every eye turned toward Eliza. She hesitated for just a moment, every instinct screaming at her to fade back into anonymity, to deflect attention, to remain safely invisible. But Commander Costa's words echoed in her mind. "You left the field, you never left the fight." Sometimes serving in the light required accepting recognition you'd rather avoid. Eliza stepped forward, moving through the ranks with quiet dignity. She came to attention in front of Captain Trenton, her eyes fixed at regulation position over his left shoulder. "Tech Hart," Trenton said, his voice carrying a note of warmth that surprised everyone present. "Your service record, while heavily classified, tells a story of exceptional dedication and capability. You have served this country with distinction in operations that most people will never know existed, and you have continued that service aboard this vessel with the same quiet excellence that has always characterized your work." He reached into his uniform pocket and withdrew a small object that gleamed in the Pacific sunlight. "While I cannot publicly acknowledge the full extent of your previous service, I can acknowledge what you have contributed to this ship and this crew. Therefore, by authority vested in me as commanding officer of this vessel, I hereby restore your honorary designation as technical advisor." The object in his hand was a collar device, not the standard insignia of enlisted rank, but something that spoke of specialized knowledge and recognized expertise. "Advisor Hart, your counsel and guidance will be welcomed by this command, and your service will be recognized with the respect it has always deserved." As Trenton pinned the advisor designation to Eliza's collar, the silence on the deck was broken by an unexpected sound, slow, measured clapping from Petty Officer Shea Marshall. "About damn time," Marshall said, his voice carrying clearly across the deck. The man who had spent months questioning Eliza's competence and challenging her authority was now applauding her recognition with obvious sincerity. The clapping spread. First Ramirez joined in, then Ketterman, then the other maintenance personnel. Within moments, the entire assembled crew was applauding, their appreciation building from polite acknowledgement to genuine enthusiasm. Flight crew joined in, deck personnel added their voices, and even the spectators who had gathered from other sections contributed to the growing demonstration of respect. Eliza stood motionless in the center of it all, overwhelmed by an emotion she couldn't quite name. For years, she had told herself that recognition didn't matter, that quiet service was its own reward, that she preferred anonymity to attention. But standing here, feeling the genuine appreciation of her fellow service members, she realized how much she had missed being seen for who she truly was. Captain Trenton stepped closer, speaking quietly enough that only she could hear. "Advisor Hart, I want you to know that I understand why you chose the path you've taken. But this crew deserves the benefit of your experience, and you deserve their respect. I hope you'll consider staying with us and sharing what you know." Eliza met his eyes directly for the first time since the recognition had begun. "Thank you, sir. I'd like that." As the applause gradually died down and the formation began to disperse, something fundamental had shifted aboard the USS Truman. The quiet tech who had worked in anonymity was now Advisor Hart, a recognized expert whose counsel would be sought and valued. More importantly, she was no longer carrying the weight of her past alone. Her shipmates now understood, at least in broad terms, that she was someone who had served with distinction and deserved their respect. Ramirez approached as Eliza was adjusting to the weight of her new collar device. "Congratulations, Advisor, though I have to say I'm not surprised. I knew there was more to your story." "Thank you, Ramirez, and please, just Hart is fine. The title doesn't change who I am." "Doesn't it?" Ramirez asked with a smile. "Because from where I stand, it looks like it changes everything." As they walked back toward the maintenance bay, Eliza found herself experiencing something she hadn't felt in years. The possibility that her past and present might finally be integrated rather than compartmentalized. She was still the person who had made difficult choices under impossible circumstances, still someone who carried the weight of decisions that had saved some lives and cost others. But she was also someone whose expertise was valued, whose service was recognized, and whose knowledge could benefit others without the life-or-death stakes that had once defined her every action. For the first time since leaving Operation Blackwake, Eliza Hart felt like she might truly be coming home. The crisis began 3 days after the recognition ceremony, manifesting first as a subtle vibration in the ship's superstructure that most personnel attributed to rough seas or normal mechanical variation. But to Advisor Hart, working late in the maintenance bay while reviewing technical manuals for an upcoming training session, the vibration pattern suggested something more troubling. She paused in her reading, tilting her head to listen more carefully to the ship's mechanical symphony. Every vessel had its own acoustic signature, a complex harmony of engines, pumps, ventilation systems, and structural movements that experienced crew members learned to interpret like a familiar language. The USS Truman's normal rhythm was as familiar to Eliza as her own heartbeat, and something in that rhythm was wrong. The variation was subtle, a slight irregularity in the harmonic pattern that suggested mechanical stress somewhere in the propulsion system. It wasn't immediately dangerous, but it was the kind of early warning that experienced technicians learned never to ignore. Eliza made her way to the engineering spaces, moving through corridors that were nearly empty during the late watch. Her new advisor status had granted her access to areas previously restricted to higher-ranking personnel, and she used that access now to investigate the source of the anomaly. In the main engine compartment, she found what she was looking for: a slight misalignment in one of the primary drive shaft assemblies. The problem was mechanical rather than electronic, probably caused by thermal expansion during the recent high-speed operations, but it was serious enough to require immediate attention. More concerning was the timing. The USS Truman was scheduled to depart its current position at 0600 hours for a critical rendezvous with a supply convoy. Any delay in that departure would cascade through multiple operational schedules, potentially affecting missions throughout the theater. Eliza pulled out her tablet and began calculating the scope of the repair. Under normal circumstances, correcting the shaft alignment would require taking the ship's propulsion system offline for minimum 6 hours, possibly longer if the misalignment had caused secondary damage to bearing assemblies or coupling mechanisms. It was exactly the kind of problem that could strand a carrier for days while waiting for specialized contractors or replacement parts. But these weren't normal circumstances, and Eliza Hart was far from a normal technician. "Advisor?" The voice came from behind her, and she turned to find Ramirez approaching with a confused expression. "What are you doing down here at this hour?" "Investigating a mechanical irregularity. What brings you to engineering?" "I was checking on the scheduled maintenance for tomorrow's operations when I heard the same thing you probably heard. Something's not quite right with the engine harmonics." Eliza nodded approvingly. Ramirez was developing the kind of mechanical intuition that separated good technicians from exceptional ones. "Your assessment is correct. We have a shaft alignment problem that needs immediate attention." How immediate? If we don't fix it before the 0600 departure, we'll be looking at minimum 6 hours of repair time, possibly more. And that's assuming we can jury-rig a solution with available materials. Ramirez's eyes widened as she processed the implications. That would delay the entire convoy operation. Among other things, yes. So what do we do? Eliza studied the younger woman's face, noting the automatic assumption that they would somehow solve the problem together. It was a significant shift from the early days when Ramirez had been intimidated by her quiet competence. Now she seemed to view Eliza as a mentor and partner rather than an enigmatic superior. "We fix it," Eliza said simply, "but not the way the manual says to fix it." Over the next hour, Eliza outlined a repair strategy that made Ramirez's head spin. Instead of the standard procedure, shutting down the entire propulsion system to allow for precise mechanical adjustment, Eliza proposed a dynamic correction that would address the alignment problem while the engines remained operational. "Is that even possible?" Ramirez asked, studying the improvised procedures that Eliza was sketching on her tablet. "It's been done before. Different ship, different circumstances, but the mechanical principles are the same." "When was it done before?" Eliza paused in her calculations, memories of the South China Sea flooding back. 2017, this ship actually. Similar problem, worse timing. As word of the mechanical problem spread through the ship's command structure, other personnel began arriving in the engineering spaces. Marshall appeared first, summoned by Chief Ketterman, who had been alerted by the duty officer. Commander Hayes followed shortly afterward, her expression grim as she absorbed the potential impact on the ship's operational schedule. "Advisor Hart," Hayes said without preamble, "I need a realistic assessment of our options." "Ma'am, we can correct the problem using standard procedures, but that will require taking the propulsion system offline for minimum 6 hours. Alternatively, we can attempt a dynamic correction that would allow us to maintain our departure schedule." "What are the risks of the alternative approach?" "Minimal risk to personnel if executed properly. Some risk to equipment if the procedure fails, but nothing that would worsen our current situation." Hayes studied Eliza's face, clearly weighing the options. "Have you performed this type of repair before?" "Yes, ma'am, successfully." "How many personnel would you need?" 3 technicians should be sufficient. I prefer to work with people familiar with my methods." Hayes nodded decisively. "You have whatever you need. How long?" 2 hours, maybe 3. As the senior officers departed to adjust operational schedules and notify higher command, Eliza found herself with an unusual situation. Rather than working alone or under suspicious scrutiny, she had a small team of eager assistants who trusted her expertise and wanted to learn from her experience. "All right," she said to Ramirez, Marshall, and Airman Rodriguez, who had volunteered for the repair detail. "This is going to be different from anything you've done before. I need you to follow my instructions exactly, without deviation, and trust that I know what I'm doing even when it doesn't make immediate sense." What followed was a masterclass in advanced mechanical engineering that none of the watching technicians would ever forget. Eliza guided them through procedures that weren't in any manual, modifications that seemed to violate basic engineering principles, and solutions that appeared impossible until they were successfully implemented. But more importantly, she taught them as she worked. Rather than simply issuing orders, she explained the theory behind each step, helped them understand why unconventional approaches sometimes worked better than standard procedures, and gradually increased their responsibility as their confidence grew. "Ramirez, I want you to monitor the bearing temperature while I make the primary adjustment," Eliza said, handing her a specialized diagnostic tool. "If it spikes above 180 degrees, we stop immediately." "Got it, but how will I know if the reading is accurate? This equipment isn't standard issue." "Because you're going to trust your other senses as well as the instruments. Feel the vibration with your hands, listen to the harmonic changes, watch for visual indicators of stress. Instruments can lie, but mechanical systems tell the truth if you know how to listen." As Ramirez took her position, Eliza noticed the younger woman's posture changing, becoming more confident, more aware, more connected to the machinery around her. It was the same transformation Eliza had experienced years earlier when a gruff senior chief had taught her that being a mechanic meant becoming part of the machine, understanding its needs and responses at an intuitive level. "Marshall," she continued, "you're going to control the alignment mechanism. Small adjustments, quarter-degree increments, and wait for my signal between each change." Marshall, who had once questioned her every decision, now nodded with complete trust. "Whatever you need, advisor." The repair proceeded with clockwork precision. Eliza orchestrated the complex procedure like a conductor leading a symphony, each team member playing their part while she maintained awareness of the entire system. When complications arose, and they always did during improvised repairs, she adapted instantly, finding alternative approaches and teaching her team to think creatively rather than rigidly. "Rodriguez, the coupling is binding slightly. Can you see why?" The young airman studied the mechanism carefully, applying the diagnostic techniques Eliza had been teaching him. "The thermal expansion is uneven. The port side is running hotter than starboard." "Correct. What does that tell you?" "That we need to compensate for the differential expansion when we make the final adjustment." "Exactly. Now show me how you do that." As Rodriguez worked through the solution, Eliza felt a satisfaction she hadn't experienced since her Operation Blackwake days. But this was different from the intense gratification of solving life-or-death problems under combat conditions. This was the quieter pleasure of passing knowledge to the next generation, of watching young technicians develop the skills and confidence they would need throughout their careers. "Time check," Marshall called out. "We've been at this for 90 minutes. "Right on schedule," Eliza replied, making the final micro-adjustments to the alignment mechanism. "Ramirez, what's your bearing temperature reading?" "Steady at 165 degrees, all harmonics normal." "Outstanding. Rodriguez, initiate the test cycle." The test revealed what Eliza had expected. The alignment problem was completely corrected, the propulsion system was operating within normal parameters, and the USS Truman was ready for its scheduled departure. More importantly, 3 junior technicians had gained experience and confidence that would serve them for the rest of their careers. "I don't believe it," Marshall said as they secured the work area. "We actually pulled it off." "We?" Eliza asked with a slight smile. "You mean you pulled it off?" "I just provided guidance." "No, ma'am," Ramirez said firmly. "We couldn't have done this without you. But more than that, you made sure we understood what we were doing, not just how to do it. That's incredible teaching." As they made their way back to the maintenance bay, Eliza reflected on how different this repair had felt from her solo work during Operation Blackwake. Then, she had been the sole expert, carrying the entire burden of success or failure on her shoulders. Now, she was part of a team, sharing both the responsibility and the satisfaction of solving complex problems. "Advisor," Rodriguez said as they reached the maintenance bay, "I know this probably sounds presumptuous, but would you be willing to teach us more? I mean formally. Because what I learned tonight is worth more than 6 months of standard training." Eliza considered the request, thinking about the knowledge she carried and the young technicians who could benefit from it. For years, she had hoarded her expertise, using it only when absolutely necessary and sharing it with no one. But tonight had shown her another way, a path that honored her past while building toward a future she had never considered. "I'd like that," she said finally. "I'd like that very much." As the team dispersed to their quarters, Eliza remained in the maintenance bay for a few more minutes, reviewing the night's work and thinking about the changes that had taken place not just in the ship's machinery, but in her own understanding of her role aboard the USS Truman. She was no longer just a technician hiding from her past. She was a teacher, a mentor, a keeper of knowledge that could benefit others. And for the first time since leaving Operation Blackwake, that felt like a mission worth embracing. The sun was setting over the Pacific as Eliza Hart made her way to one of the quieter sections of the USS Truman's flight deck. The day's operations had concluded, aircraft secured, and crews stood down, leaving the vast expanse of steel deck nearly empty except for the occasional watchstander making routine patrols. It had been 2 weeks since the emergency repair that had kept the ship on schedule, and the changes in Eliza's daily routine were still taking some adjustment. Her new role as technical advisor had evolved organically into something that felt both familiar and entirely new. She was teaching, mentoring, sharing knowledge that had been locked away for years. The junior technicians who had worked with her during the crisis had become regular students, seeking her guidance on everything from complex diagnostics to career development. But tonight she needed solitude to process a conversation that had taken place earlier in her quarters. Her secure communication device had chimed at 1,847 hours, displaying an encrypted message from a sender she hadn't heard from in months. The message was brief, containing only a contact frequency and a time: 2030 hours. Now, as the Pacific sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Eliza activated the secure channel and waited. The familiar voice that came through the encrypted link carried her back to a different time, a different version of herself. Hart, it's been too long. Commander Costa. Eliza settled against the island superstructure, watching the last aircraft of the day being secured by deck crews. I received your patch. And your note. I thought you might need a reminder of who you used to be. Who I used to be, or who I still am. Costa's laugh carried warmth that transcended the electronic distortion of the secure channel. That's the question, isn't it? I've been getting reports about your activities aboard the Truman. Sounds like you've been busy. Just doing my job. Hart, we both know that what you've been doing goes far beyond just doing your job. Training junior personnel, solving complex mechanical problems, earning the respect of your shipmates, that's not hiding, that's leading. Eliza watched a young airman performing final checks on a secured FA/A-18, noting the careful attention to detail, the systematic approach that spoke of good training and natural aptitude. It's different from what we used to do. Is it? Think about it, Hart. What was our mission in Blackwake? We operated in the shadows to keep the light burning for everyone else. We took on the dangerous assignments, the impossible problems, the situations where failure wasn't an option. How is teaching the next generation of technicians any different? The question hung in the air as Eliza considered it. For years, she had thought of her current assignment as a retreat from significance, a withdrawal from the important work she had once done. But Costa's perspective reframed everything. The stakes are different, Eliza said finally. Are they? Hart, every technician you train properly, every problem you help them solve, every piece of knowledge you pass on, that's going to ripple through their entire careers. Some of those kids you're teaching are going to find themselves in critical situations where what you taught them makes the difference between mission success and failure, between life and death. I never thought of it that way. Because you've been so focused on what you lost that you haven't been paying attention to what you're building. Hart, I've seen the reports from Captain Trenton, from Commander Hayes, from the junior personnel you've been working with. They're not just learning technical skills from you. They're learning how to think, how to approach problems, how to carry themselves as professionals. That's not maintenance work. That's building the future of the Navy. As if to emphasize Costa's point, Specialist Ramirez appeared on the flight deck, making her way across the deck with the confident stride of someone who had grown substantially in recent weeks. She spotted Eliza and changed direction to approach. Excuse me for interrupting, advisor, Ramirez said with the easy respect that had replaced her earlier nervousness. I wanted to let you know that the training session you suggested for tomorrow has been approved by Commander Hayes. We'll have 6 technicians from other sections joining us. Outstanding. Did you prepare the materials we discussed? Yes, ma'am. And I took the liberty of reaching out to some contacts on other ships. There's a lot of interest in the techniques you've been teaching us. We might want to consider developing a more formal curriculum. After Ramirez departed, Costa's voice came through the communicator with obvious amusement. Sounds like you're building something significant there, Hart. Maybe. It's certainly more satisfying than I expected. That's because you're doing what you were always meant to do, using your expertise to make other people better at their jobs. The only difference is that now you're doing it in daylight instead of shadow. Eliza reached into her pocket and pulled out the Blackwake patch, running her fingers over the familiar texture of the fabric. She had been carrying it for weeks now, a tangible reminder of who she had been and what she had sacrificed, but tonight, for the first time, it felt less like a burden and more like a foundation. Costa, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you ever regret the things we did, the choices we made? The silence that followed was longer than the encryption delay, and when Costa spoke again, her voice carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. Hart, I regret every life we lost. I regret every mistake we made, every opportunity we missed to bring everyone home safely. But I don't regret the service itself. We did work that mattered, in places where no one else could operate, under conditions that would have broken most people. That's not something to regret. That's something to honor. Even when it cost us so much? Especially when it cost us so much. The price we paid, the isolation, the secrecy, the weight of carrying knowledge we could never share. That price wasn't wasted if we use what we learned to make things better for the people who come after us. Eliza looked out across the darkening Pacific, thinking about the young technicians she had been working with, the knowledge she had been sharing, the quiet satisfaction she found in watching them grow in confidence and capability. "I think I'm beginning to understand," she said finally. "Good, because I have one more thing to tell you, and I want you to really hear this. You did good, Hart. In Blackwake, aboard the Truman, in all the quiet places where you've served, you've always been the light, even when you were working in shadow. Don't let anyone, including yourself, convince you otherwise." The connection ended with a soft click, leaving Eliza alone with her thoughts and the gradually appearing stars. She looked down at the patch in her hands, then carefully opened her tool bag and pinned it to the inside pocket. Not hidden, but not displayed. A private reminder of where she had come from and who she had become. From her other pocket, she pulled out her tablet and accessed her personnel file. Buried in the routine forms and administrative documents was a transfer request she had drafted weeks earlier, before the recognition ceremony, before the emergency repair, before she had begun to understand what her life aboard the Truman could become. She read through the request one final time, remembering the mindset that had prompted her to write it, the desire to disappear again, to find another assignment where she could serve anonymously without the weight of expectation or recognition. Then she deleted it, watching the words disappear from the screen with a sense of finality that felt like liberation. Eliza Hart was no longer running from her past. She was building on it, using the knowledge and experience she had gained in shadow to bring light to others. The tattoo on her wrist, in Umbra, Lux, had taken on new meaning. She had thought it marked her as someone who operated in darkness, but now she understood it differently. It marked her as someone who brought illumination wherever it was needed, whether in the classified operations of her past or the training sessions of her present. As she made her way back to her quarters, Eliza felt the weight of completion. Not the end of her story, but the integration of all its chapters into something coherent and meaningful. She was still the person who had served in Operation Blackwake, still someone who carried classified knowledge and survivor's guilt, but she was also Advisor Hart, teacher and mentor. Someone whose expertise was valued and whose guidance was sought. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to share knowledge and help others grow. There would be complex problems to solve, junior personnel to guide, and the ongoing work of keeping the machinery running smoothly. It wasn't the dramatic high-stakes work of her past, but it was important in its own way. Perhaps more important, because it was building something lasting rather than simply responding to crises. As Eliza settled into her quarters for the night, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, genuine peace with who she was and what she was doing. The shadows of her past no longer seemed like places to hide, but like foundations upon which to build light for others. She had served in darkness so that others could live in light. Now she was learning that sometimes the most important light was the kind that illuminated the path forward for the next generation. In shadow, light. The motto had guided her through the darkest chapters of her career, and now it was guiding her towards something she had never expected. Not redemption, but continuation. Not an end to her service, but an evolution of it. Eliza Hart had finally come home, not to a place, but to a purpose that honored both who she had been and who she was becoming. And that, she thought, as sleep finally claimed her, was enough. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.